And we're live. Everybody, how you doing?
Oh, so good. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. It's gonna be great. So we're talking about abortion.
Yes.
And the Twitter that show everyone's been seeing going on.
Yeah.
How did that start exactly, Ace? Like, what was the first thing that kicked you off?
Honestly, I'm trying. That's a very good question. I'm trying to remember exactly what happened. I honestly, to be honest, I don't remember what first happened, but I know these people. Yeah. Honestly, I'm trying to remember. I don't remember where it started. It's like an Ouroboros. It's just this infinite loop. It's just
Keep going. So let's just start off with the hardest question. Ace, why do you keep comparing women to boats, planes, and balloons?
Right. Yeah. So, okay, the amount of this was really frustrating to me. Like, no matter how many times I had to like clarify it. So seriously though, like the amount of times people were trying to tell me that, well, no, this isn't the same because it's they're different things. Well, yes, obviously they're different things. If they were the same thing, there would be no reason to compare them, right? Like there'd be no reason for an analogy at all. So I do want to make it clear, like, assuming people know, or maybe we should like, do you want to like talk about what the discussion is first, or do you want to like just jump into it?
Let's talk about a little bit about what it is. So
okay,
talking about abortion. I think we all come at it from a little bit a different angle. I come at it of religious Christian, kind of the Catholic viewpoint. What do you guys come at it from? Let's start with Kerry. Where do you how do you derive your pro-life view?
Well, I'd say I used to take a religious bent. I'm Protestant, though not Catholic. But now my position is completely philosophical. And I guess for those in your audience who don't know, I debated Walter Block on this point. So, I've gone toe to toe with him on a libertarian, specifically libertarian perspective. But yeah, my view is primarily philosophical and scientific.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Ellie, what about you?
That would be the same. It was more like, you kind of inherit your beliefs from your parents. And then at some point you have to go, all right, I need to own these. And I go, okay, do I hold this belief only because of what I was taught and because I believe that, everything originated from God, yada, yada, or is there an actual philosophical scientific case for this? And so I set about trying to uncover that, and that's how I ended up here.
Ace, what about you?
Yeah, so I kind of take a more philosophical view of it too, where it's like the arguments I'm using actually against abortion are actually the ones Walter Block would use in favor of it a lot. So I came across his eviction argument years and years ago, and I knew I had problems with it, but the more I thought about it, the more I was able to articulate why. And that's why I often use some of the similar analogies he uses in favor of it, actually, as a reason why I oppose it.
Nice. So, what are the common arguments that you guys hear? Because there's a lot of common arguments people bring up. But what would you say is the most common argument people throw at the pro-life position?
Kerry, you want to go first?
The most common argument from the conventional pro-life side, is that what you're asking?
Against the pro-life side, from the pro-choice side.
Oh, from the pro-choice side. Well, I think probably the predominant view right now is just that a fetus doesn't have a right to occupy the mother's womb. I think that's probably the most popular at this point. Some variant of my body, my choice.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I would. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying, yeah, I agree. I think it's probably like they couch it in terms of bodily autonomy, which it's like when I was arguing with them on Twitter, it's like I was not denying the bodily autonomy of the mother, right? That's actually not what any of this is about. It's about the bodily autonomy of the fetus, if the fetus has a right to its body. So that's essentially, in my opinion, the crux of the argument.
Yeah. Ellie, anything you want to add to that, or?
No, basically the same thing. One thing I've noticed is that they're all, what I'm encountering lately, they're all emotionally driven.
Mm-hmm.
It's an emotional topic, and they devolve. I mean, it's just claim after claim after claim. No one has an argument that can support. That's why I cling to when somebody finally comes up with at least something interesting. Okay, let's look at this. I'll dive head first. Like I'm desperate for that because there is no argument. It's just, but I want it to be this, so it is.
Yeah, and both sides, to be fair, both sides of the conventional debate, what I call the conventional debate, both pro-life and pro-choice are incredibly emotionally charged and morally outraged and just, screaming past one another. I think it's important, though, to point out to those people who claim bodily autonomy that it's because of bodily autonomy that the fetus has a right to live and even a right to occupy the mother's womb. Unfortunately, I think the conventional pro-life side gets it wrong by saying, oh, you're making this argument for bodily autonomy and you believe it results in the right to abort. Ergo, a woman doesn't have a right to bodily autonomy, and that's not true either. So I think I think it's important that we maintain very consistently bodily autonomy for both the woman and the fetus.
Yeah, and that is something that I noticed a lot. Like not only they're very emotional, but all arguments are like. I'm trying to figure out how to put this correctly. Like you said, when people bring bodily autonomy, the conservatives who are traditional pro-life, they either come out like I hate seeing them do it, debate honestly, because like I agree with their position, and they come at it and they'll just say the quote scripts of us, and then they act like that instead of it, and then they say women don't have right to bodily autonomy. And it's like you butchered my side. Stop.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what kind of arguments do you guys like to use? Like if you had a friend who was pro-choice, what kind of arguments do you try to use when it comes to actually not just like making fun of someone or showing how dumb they are or trying to mock them kind of thing? Like what is the actual argument you use to try to convince a pro-choicer?
So many. It depends. Well, it depends on the situation, and it depends on who they are. Mm-hmm. I vacillate between being like painstakingly empathetic, and then also, I get like I am right now. I'm in the middle of a really, really long, tedious hurling claims, and I'm just like, okay, and so I blow those off, and those are for the audience, more than anything else. But really, it depends on the person. It depends on the circumstance and what angle they're coming from. Trying to diffuse the emotionalism is really important to getting them to see it for what it is. And so that's where I use analogies the same way that Ace does. To try to get them, okay, let's think about this in a situation that's not emotionally charged. To get them to acknowledge that, yes, rights, your bodily autonomy is limited by the rights of the people around you. It's not absolute. You can't swing your fist and bludgeon a toddler with it. They have the right to not be harmed, and that supersedes your right. Your rights are naturally limited. And so really it comes down to trying to get them to see that one way or another. It has to boil down to that.
Yeah. I 100% agree.
Yeah, I probably do it a little bit differently. I very much pick my battles. If I can see that somebody's emotionally charged, I won't touch it, because there's, at that point, it's like if they aren't going to engage in a dialogue with me, it's rather pointless. But for those who are willing to engage in a dialogue with me, usually I try to find out what it is that's important to them on the topic, and it can be anything from the problem of abusive relationships or rape or poverty or the reasons that women typically seek out abortions to begin with. And then we talk about, how do you resolve those outside of just ending the life of your unborn baby? There's two sides or two questions, I think, that are at stake in the debate. One is, of course, the legality question, but the other question is, how do you actually end the practice of abortion, which is an economic question. And the conventional pro-life side doesn't like to talk about abortion in terms of economics because they think that gives it credence. But if it's also an economic problem, then we can talk about it in terms of, human action and finding alternative solutions. What can the market provide? That sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And usually I will also agree with them when it comes to enforcement problems on the legal question. I'm definitely anti-authoritarian when it comes to enforcing abortion prohibition. I think every libertarian should be opposed to that. And so I think that helps gain some common ground with some of these, some on the pro-choice side.
Yeah, that is definitely something that gets frustrating, because you talk to a conservative about, as a bunch of conservatives, I'm a paleo guy, I talk to a lot of conservatives, and you bring up your pro-life and you say, I don't like the abortion laws, I want to make abortion obsolete, or it's not necessary, and they just lose their cool. Like, on that topic, Ace, you had a tweet about abortions no longer being like medically necessary. Was that what was it?
Yeah,
exactly.
So my point, and I actually got some criticism from some like right wingers from this, and it was I wasn't surprised by it, but it was I feel like they kind of misunderstood me. So my tweet was essentially like, look, in 30 or 50 years, we're going to have more than likely we're going to have artificial wombs, and we're likely going to be able to extract the fetus safely out of the mother into an artificial womb. And this is going to drastically cut down on the number of unborn children who are murdered normally by abortion. And this would be like the next best thing possible. And this will be a great thing, practically speaking. I got a little bit of flack because they some conservatives thought it was like really gross and kind of dystopian. And I can understand.
Yeah,
like,
I saw the
imagery.
transhumanism critique. I was like, what?
Right. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Well, ultimately, at the end of the day, the conventional pro-lifers want women to want their babies. So they want to solve the problem of wantedness rather than saying, how do we solve the problem when there's an unwanted pregnancy to begin with? Because you're not going to be able to solve unwantedness. That's just, again, in economic terms, that's just preference. There's nothing wrong with a woman who doesn't want to be pregnant.
Right. And that I analogized it to like adoption, right? The like transferring the fetus into like an artificial womb. It's not like that far away removed from like adoption itself. So
sure.
That's something that we as libertarians are kind of like in this space. Like even when we're pro-life, we're still arguing with the conservatives about this. It's how do I put this? I wrote it down, but I lost my notes. I had someone who's Catholic. I do a lot with the Catholic pro-lifers, and I think they're great because they are some of the most consistent. But also, when it comes to like the arguments, like they also want to outlaw contraception.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they I try to explain to them, like, hey, if you want to outlaw all forms of contraception, you're going to probably lead to an increase in abortions. Like, no, it wouldn't. It's like they don't actually want to decrease the numbers. Like,
right.
This is the only time I get utilitarian to talk about numbers. Is like when it comes to abortions, you should want less of them. Whatever that is to be the answer. And they also principle it into their tradition. They just refuse to accept anything that's not reverting back to the old days where everyone wanted their kids. So how do we, let's talk about dealing with pro-lifers for a little bit. Like, how do we come at these, how do we talk to these pro-life people who are kind of in that staunch traditionalist, we need to solve the problem of wantedness? Like, how do we communicate with these people?
Oof. It's so hard because they can be just as militant as some of the, pro-abortion crowd.
Yeah.
It's so difficult. They get so morally outraged, and it's like, I mean, I've heard them say things like, we should have a war on abortion, and it should look just like the war on drugs. And I'm like,
you want more?
Like, really?
You want abortion to win? What?
I know.
What is this?
It's like, sometimes the way they talk about women, it's as though they're just incubators. They're sort of secondary. And really what I want to say to these people is, especially in light of COVID-19 and what we've been experiencing with that, is when the object of state interest resides or potentially resides inside of you, then suddenly you disappear. And we're seeing that like real time. And so for those conservatives who tend to be more about, at least about, American ideology and mythology, the idea that we have a constitution, we have constitutional rights. It's like, you can't see how a woman disappears when the focus is all on the fetus. Yeah. Like, we should be able to see that very clearly now. And given that we're demanding our bodily autonomy when it comes to choices regarding infection, it's not unreasonable that a woman would want choices and bodily autonomy when it comes to her unwanted pregnancy, or just pregnancy to begin with. I mean, there's already enough medical paternalism out there as it is. So I think, if we're going to use analogies, we should use the very real example of what's going on with the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Great point.
I think trying to get to write more conservative types who are come at that from a slightly different pro-life side would be I don't think they're wrong necessarily to want to strike at the core root, which is not wanting the child, right? I think that's a very noble goal, but I think they shouldn't they should always be aware that if we're taking steps in the direction of there are certain activities or certain technological market incentives or innovations that are saving more children on average. I think that's just a net benefit, a net win overall.
Yeah.
I don't think you should you can still go for that goal, but I don't think you should criticize these other things that might actually help would-be mothers in the first place.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What are some of the dumbest arguments you guys have heard from the abortion side? Let's have some fun with this. What are the dumbest things you've heard?
There were a lot of them. For one, one I kept getting kind of annoyed by over time was when they kept telling me that I was rejecting the mother's bodily autonomy, and I specifically interjected over and over that was not the reason why, right? If I was just that wasn't even a consideration. I start from the point of bodily autonomy, and then I move forward in the argument. And also they gave me this one thing where it's when I posed a hypothetical thought experiment to them to see if they would apply the same standard they apply to abortion in other cases, like conjoined twins, as was one of the examples I gave. And they kept telling me, well, that's so rare, that almost never happens. It's okay, that's not the point of the thought experiment. The thought experiment is to elucidate some underlying things. Right, they're not the same things.
Rape is also rare.
Right, exactly. There you go.
Not the norm, guys.
I hate so much when you say things so when does a fetus become a baby? 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. No abortion happens at 8 months. It's that's not the question.
That's not the right. That's or the people trying to when they were criticizing my analogy, they kept trying to say that I was trying to say that women were planes or they were just objects.
I saw that.
That's why the stream is called Boats, Planes, and Hot Air Balloons.
Oh, there you go. That's good. That's good. Yeah, but they kept trying to say that I was trying to say that women were like planes. And I'm like, no, technically, if you want to get really technical here, I compared women to pilots. I didn't compare them to planes, first off. So
they keep conflating. I'm having that right now. They keep conflating. Okay, there's the person and there's the property of that person. And there's the, and they keep flip-flopping back and forth as it suits them to try to shore up their own, their own position and their own beliefs, basically just kind of building a wall around themselves. But do you constantly get right now? I'm constantly every other tweet is, you don't understand consent. Well, that's not consent. Well, the mother doesn't consent to be guys, consent has nothing to do with involuntary bodily functions. Your heart beats whether you want it to or not. You have to act to end it. There's consent has nothing to do with it. Yeah. And so they confuse that a lot.
Oh yeah. And they also confuse, bodily autonomy, because it's if I'm saying that you can, my position on this was that the mother does have the right to evict, but you can't kill in the process because that would be disproportionate, right? That'd be disproportionate force. And they kept saying, well, no, because it's my body, I can do what I want. And every time I pose the conjoined twin analogy, or if some mad scientist stitched one of us together, it's okay, does the other person, they freak out. Does the other person have a right to kill? Do they both have a right to kill each other in some sense, right? Because they're using each other's body without their consent. It's well, I would think no, that'd be disproportional, right? Even if both have a right to separate from each other, that would they tend to strawman that argument a lot from what I've seen, but it's
I can only take right to evict from a constructed premise, right?
Yeah.
If I accept that trespass was present,
then
they have a right to evict.
Yeah.
But I have never found anyone that can prove trespass. Trespass by definition requires entry. They never entered. They were put in that position. They were created there. they've done nothing.
I that's a very good point too, because I was even granting them trespass just to say that.
That's
like,
what I
even
mean.
if it,
Like I have
even
to
if
grant
it was
trespass to be able to say, okay.
Yeah, I don't even grant trespass.
Right. Yeah. So even
Like,
if
I
I
just
granted
don't.
trespass, I still don't think that gets them to the point of where they want to be. You know what I mean?
Right.
But
No,
yeah.
and you're absolutely right about that. Even if we grant trespass, it's not a proportional response.
Mhm.
At the very least, you have to wait for viability before you evict, and you're on the hook for finding a suitable alternative.
That's right.
Be it an adoptive parent or a surrogate or an artificial womb or whatnot. So.
Because you did this, not
Right.
the fetus.
I also thought it was pretty funny because over time they kept saying how my analogy wasn't like apt or whatever, and the more I thought about it, I'm like, you know what? Actually, you're right in one way. It's not even like a normal trespasser because the baby can't leave, so it's actually more like a prisoner if you want to play this game, right?
Yeah, I mean, but they're like, oh well, that wouldn't happen. But that's exactly the situation you've created. Just because it's unique in nature doesn't mean that human, the rights that define the limits of human interaction don't apply to it.
Right.
Well, and if the fetus is potentially a trespasser or a criminal against the mother, then we were all criminals, to begin with. All of us were criminals to begin with. And if that's the case, then all of us have rights, not based on our humanity, not inherent in our humanity, but because our mothers decided to recognize them. And that's just matriarchy.
Right.
So that
Some of
doesn't,
them probably like that.
huh?
Some of them are probably like that. The feminist crazy ones.
No, you're right.
A little bit.
I'll tell you, the Christian feminist argument is based on the notion that the woman has a divine right to choose who will be born.
Wow, I have never heard that before.
Yep.
And
That's a rabbit hole I'm going to have to go down. Wow.
Yeah,
a little bit.
the philosopher who came up with that one, her name is Beverly Wildung Harrison. You can find she's got a book called Our Right to Choose. And, she does argue for bodily autonomy, a divine right to bodily autonomy. She just overstates it and says that that's extended to choosing who will be born.
But see, how does she reconcile then? And you don't have to answer if this is a rabbit hole for another day. But how would she how can she state, and claim bodily autonomy, but not bodily autonomy? Like so is it only women have the right to bodily autonomy?
So yeah, so she relativizes the autonomy of the fetus, and she also makes this she's arguing from this idea of women are victims of the patriarchy, and I mean she wrote this way back in 1984, and it totally sounds like woke nonsense today. These white privileged elite and all of that. So basically, it's an argument that women are victims of misogyny and lack of privilege, and because of that, they have to have a right to abort in order to really truly have their right to bodily autonomy.
I've never heard any of this before. Wow. The Christian feminist argument.
It's crazy.
That's
nuts.
Research.
Yep.
That's scary. It's scary finding out what beliefs are actually floating around out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, since we are pro-life, I think everyone uses the word pro-life to identify this position, correct? No one's having any new terms.
I don't
for
have
everyone.
any problems with it. No.
Yeah,
everyone
no.
gets pro-life. So, inherent in the pro-life argument that we believe it's a life, do we all agree life begins at conception, or do we any of us draw different lines on the starting point? Are we on agreement on this?
I'm still waffling a little bit between conception and first cell division, but other than that, it's like it's within 12 hours of each other. So
I always say that life begins the moment conception is complete. What I've found is that conception is actually a 3-day process that begins with fertilization, and because you can have a fertilized egg that never completes that process of conception. And so what's interesting about that process, though, is there's something they call the maternal zygotic transition. which is where the embryo transitions from genetic instructions from the mother to genetic instructions from the zygote, so that by the end of conception, the zygote is completely autonomous and self-organizing. So from that point forward, development is actually driven by the zygote. Even the placenta and umbilical cord are created by baby.
Yeah.
So I think there's no reason to say that it's any time after that. When that process is complete, it's completely independent of the mother.
Yeah.
So I've never looked at it that way. What is the last step in that marks completion? Is it a cell division? Is it implantation? Is it?
No, it's implantation usually takes about 1 to 2 weeks after conception.
I was gonna say a week or so.
Yeah. So so one of the key things that you can actually identify in like a petri dish situation is at the end of conception, there's something called a zinc spark. It releases zinc, and under, I think, infrared light,
That's so cool.
There's actually a spark of light when the zygote is fully maturated. Yeah, not maturated, but when that process is complete, there's a spark of light because it's releasing the zinc. So it's a definite time when it goes from these two cells that are going through the process of mitosis. It is a definite time when the zygote has taken over.
Yeah.
So it's very clear. Yeah.
I like that. It becomes more, and the process of growing becomes more independent. I like that as the defining point. That makes a lot of people. Like I personally use the its potentiality is person, and it actualizes. It doesn't metamorph. It just grows naturally. So it kind of, since it just develops along its course, it's not transforming something. It becomes human, so it is human. But I like the science arguments as I got, and it's much more.
What's interesting about that maternal zygotic transition is that the genetic instructions from mom start to taper off as the zygotic instructions start to turn on. And if you look at the development of born children up until full development, which is 25 years of age, you have that same sort of pattern, right? In the beginning, parents have more control over baby. And then when you get to about adolescence is when parents and children start, testing each other's limits. And eventually you get to a point where, you're just guiding your teen, and your teen is starting to take over. So you actually follow that same pattern as you develop into an adult.
Anybody have anything to add? Or
No, that was great.
Oh, that was great.
That was awesome.
That was good.
You're so great, Kerry.
A lot of the arguments that I hear, a lot of them is that the fetus is robbing the mother of life and is aggressing against her by siphoning off food, and is a parasite, even though it's not all what a parasite is by definition. And I don't know how many times I had to explain that. The parasite, I got so tired of it. It was ridiculous. It's like they refuse to accept definitions of anything.
Right.
Oh yeah.
If the fetus is a parasite, then I don't see how there's much of a distinction between like a child and a parasite. If you wanted to accept their definition that the fetus was one, the child is also, it's a one-way transaction, but with resources for, going one way practically. Yeah. So it's just not literally connected anymore. But you still have to provide for your child, right? So if they want to go down that it's a parasite route, then that's going to go down a very dark road in regards to children.
Well, a parasite is literally a different species from human.
Right.
It's also it's not biologically advantageous to have a parasite because it will deteriorate your health when, in normal situations, being pregnant for a woman is actually biologically advantageous. There's incentive for for the mother to replenish her nutritive stores. And that's actually a feasible thing to do when you're pregnant. If you have a parasite, it's constantly, there's no way to actually replenish those stores because it's constantly drawing off of you. It's malicious towards the body. It's not biologically advantageous. And it's a completely different species.
Yeah. And a parasite doesn't just go, oh, I'm gonna do this for a few months and then I'm gonna just fuck off over here.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, that's a permanent thing until it's exterminated. Whereas procreation is not. Now, I will grant them parasitic. I will entertain the discussion when they say parasitic. If they say it's a parasite, no, that has a definition and it is a different species. So that's not even possible. But parasitic gives you some creative license and it can be, you know, like a parasite or, you know, and talking about the feeding off of. But it all is boiling down to lately in the last few weeks, really militant. It's harming the mother. Right. It's, you know, it's killing her. It's
every pregnancy is life threatening apparently.
Right. Every pregnancy now is
it has a higher deadly rate. It's more deadly than COVID. It's
right. You know, someone
that's not saying much, but
someone was trying to tell me because they were talking about how there's risk with it, and my point was that there's risk with anything you do. Right. Yeah, you go outside, you're incurring more risk upon yourself. If you get in your car, you're incurring more risk upon yourself. And someone was trying to tell me, well, you know, going in a car and going on the road, that's not as risky as childbirth. And I pulled up the statistics, and more than 30,000 people die every year on the road. And I think it was like last year in America, or a couple of years ago in America, 800 women died in childbirth compared to 30,000 people on the road.
Well, and risk is the whole reason why women are supposed to make, you know, conscious decisions about what they do with their body. Like, if it's that risky, then, you know, why are you choosing to have sex, or why are you choosing to do it with that guy over there? You know, it's like you should be a little bit more discretionary if you're really concerned about how big this risk is.
I'm trying to get at the underlying what is broken in their empathy, in their humanity, that has them go, it's preferable to create a whole other human and just murder them at will, to be able to have sex how I want, when I want. Like, what's broken in you?
Consent to sex is not consent to pregnancy.
Led you to that place where you're that psychopathic.
Right. Well, and they also are saying now that because a baby cannot be made without sperm, then the pregnancy is entirely 100% the fault of the
I had that
father. I'm just like, oh God, really? Come on.
Like, what was it? Ejaculation causes pregnancy. I was like, let's look at that. The 12-year-old jacking off in a sock is not causing a pregnancy.
Yeah.
So let's be precise with our language.
Well, and I keep on coming back to, like, okay, you want to have bodily autonomy and agency, and yet you're trying to tell me that in all of these situations you don't have bodily autonomy and agency. Like, why would you claim that? Why would you say that, you know, none of this is your fault? You know, you're not responsible for any of this. I get it when it comes to the rape argument, right? That's reasonable. But in situations where they chose to have sex, you can't just claim, oh, I'm a victim of nature, or I'm a victim of men, or I'm a victim of my own ignorance, or whatever. That's just, you know, you either have agency or you don't. And if you have agency, then you have some responsibilities over your actions.
Right. It's like if I, you know, going back to the plane analogy, if I invited someone on my plane and then I kicked them out in midair, it would be like me saying, well, I only consented to have them on my plane. I didn't necessarily consent for them to be safely landed. You know what I mean? It would be something like that.
No, it's implied that you'll land and let them off.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why, I mean, I'm there. If anybody comes up with a perfect analogy, please share it with me.
Right.
Because I'm desperate. I'm coming up with so many.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and it's like, but the best I can come up with so far, because it's not drugging them and bringing them into you or whatever. It's like inviting someone to dinner, right? And you go out and you get them and you bring them to your home and you bring them in and you set them down and you lay before them the food that you've prepared for them, because you've created this fetus. You've created a campsite for it inside your body, you know, and then you decide to murder your dinner guest the first time they put food, because you're like, wait, no, that's my food.
Right.
And then you murder them for putting the food that you gave them in their mouths. Like, it's no.
Right.
That's the best I can come up with. So
yeah, no,
far.
that's really good. Yeah. And I kept trying to use different ones on them because I wanted to see which one would get them to, see. Yeah.
We're bordering on spaghetti logic here. Just
right.
Like, get it
yeah, exactly. Every time I brought up the conjoined twins example, they went apoplectic. Like that's really set them off. They were,
Yeah, I don't know how many times I had to explain like an object can refer to a person.
Right.
Like you can literally post a definition and they just ignore it.
Right.
It's like,
always.
Or if I was talking about the womb, they thought, "Oh, you just think women are wombs." It's like, no, I'm talking about the womb. I'm not.
Right.
Like
the person
you
is
can't
not
use
the
who's.
property. Like, do you understand that? Well, I own my body. Okay. So you're saying you're not your body? Okay, good. Right. We've established that. Stop it.
Right. Yep.
It's so
one of my favorites is the sentient. I got thrown that one. That's an oldie but a goodie.
Yeah,
it's not sentient. My houseplant is sentient. Like,
right.
No, guys. Have you bothered to look it up? Like, do you know what sentience is? Able to feel what?
Right. Exactly.
Anything.
Yep. Yeah. There is one that this actually gets thrown around by like a lot of libertarians, which they'll say, and this is actually, I think, sort of Rothbard's point too, where it's like, well, killing the baby is just returning it. You're not doing more harm to the baby than its natural state. So I've had some people try to say, well, the baby's natural state is non-existence, but that's inherently contradictory. You can't start at non-existence as the starting point. Right. You can only start at existence. I've had people unironically try to argue that with me.
That's so strange. I would be like, so is your natural state non-existent?
Right.
Because
so exactly. Can I just? Yeah. Right. That's right. Exactly.
Mine is naked and very small. It's not.
Right.
It's like, that just hurts my brain.
Right.
Oof.
Mind-bending. Yeah, lots of oofs. Gosh, it's and on both sides, Yeah, the pro-life, the traditional pro-life side, the pro-abortion side, that's the only reason that I hesitate a little bit when someone calls me pro-life or feel like I need to explain is because that's what comes to mind for most people. Is that traditional? It's this religious person who wants to use government to force people to carry their pregnancies to term, like
right.
First, that's not even how force works, but but I'm not that person, and so it's like, how do you? I wish there was a word for us.
Well, I usually point out that I'm a pro-life anarchist, and that immediately sets off cognitive dissonance. Right. It's like wait, huh? Wait, what? It's like, okay, now I can explain.
Trying to teach these people about ownership. God.
Oh my gosh.
A woman, no one has any right, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, then, but 2 tweets ago, you were like championing government force. Like, really?
Yeah.
That's exercising ownership control over another person.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I'd say I'm as critical of conventional pro-lifers as I am of conventional pro-choicers. But yeah, I mean, the conventional pro-lifers have some doozies as well.
Yeah.
And some of their tactics, it's like, why do that? Like the giant pictures of aborted fetuses.
Yeah. Come on.
Like, okay, you might get some biology student on campus who's, isn't turned off and disgusted by that. But the pro-choice person who's turned off and disgusted by that is not going to start a conversation with you unless they're going to fight you.
No, it's conservative virtue signaling.
Yes, yeah.
That's really what it boils down to.
And all this money that conservatives have spent over the years trying to overturn Roe v. Wade. Imagine if they had instead taken that money and created would-be clinics for people who women who were poor, who were would-be mothers, right?
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah.
Just that would have just practically speaking, that would have saved a lot more children than all that money they threw away to the Heritage Foundation to lobby for.
Circumvent the perceived need for abortion.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, and to be honest, I mean, the pro-life movement is actually the most dismissive of crisis pregnancy centers, which is ridiculous because there are more crisis pregnancy centers in America than there are abortion clinics. And many of them provide tons of services that you wouldn't even actually think of. I've seen crisis pregnancy centers offer pro bono legal services for women in abusive relationships. So I think they do a disservice by sort of keeping that on the down low until they're able to, get the person on the street corner to confess Jesus before they say, no, I don't want to have an abortion. I'm just really but anyways, their tactics can be really bothersome, especially like you said, Ace, when it comes to the Roe v. Wade stuff. I did an analysis of all of the Supreme Court cases relevant to abortion since just before Roe v. Wade. And the vast majority of them, Roe v. Wade included, were decided by Republican appointed Supreme Court justices.
Right.
So I lay legal abortion at the feet of Republicans because it's their Supreme Court appointments that have made it possible.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
I have talked to some Republicans, and they'll say things like the Republican Party is a mess and terrible, and I agree more with the LP Party, but abortion is the number one issue, so I have to vote Republican. And it's they haven't done anything for you.
Right. Yeah.
Even the Libertarian Party, with its pro-choice stance, still wants to get rid of government-funded Planned Parenthood stuff.
Right.
So, even the Libertarian side, we got a little bit more pro-life than you are.
Right.
It's
yeah.
I don't get it. I know I've noticed a lot towards the end of any abortion debate, when you kind of disillusion them of all their points and kind of show them they have no consistency, they always put, I dedicate my next abortion to you. Which is always that's the most disgusting shit you ever seen.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. What is broken? What is broken inside you?
Yeah.
It's like when the Taliban or whatever, is conditioning people to be these bloodthirsty, what happened? How did these women become so radicalized?
Well, if you want my honest opinion, I think that it's like a cornered cat. They're incredibly defensive. They don't actually know what it is that they believe. They've been told this is the cornerstone of women's rights. They've been told that the state is the guarantor of their rights. And I mean, this is one of my biggest grievances against feminists is that they went from your husband is your provider to the state is your provider. There was never any instance where women actually took ownership of their rights and took ownership of their freedom and bothered to learn what it was. So you have a ton of women out there who have been told, the state protects your rights. The cornerstone of those rights is abortion. And if you lose abortion, you lose everything. And so when you're talking to some of these women, I think it's more like you're talking to a cornered cat. They don't know what else to do except to lash out.
That's a really good point, because I've noted for years, as I've walked this path toward anarchism, that, you take a look around you and all of society, not to mention, specific people groups in their own ways, but all of society, we live in a pressure cooker of coercion from cradle to grave.
Yep.
And it's astonishing to me. It's a testament to the human spirit and its resiliency, and just the species as a whole, that we are not just murdering each other all the time.
Right.
Mhm.
You know, the fact that we can adapt this well and cope to so much wrong. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say? I had a point I wanted to make, but then I was thinking about as someone who is a pro-life anarchist, has any of you guys ever had a status person say to you, like a conservative, say, "Oh, well, you care more about anarchism than pro-life? Because if you actually believed in pro-life, you would want government enforcement of it, and under anarchism there'd be more abortion." So I don't know if you guys, but I've heard that quite a bit.
I usually tell people statism is chaos. And so the best way to protect the unborn is polycentric legal order.
Right.
Just like that.
And
Right.
then they go, what?
I don't word it quite like that, but
Yeah. Well, I mean, and if you just look at it like, do you know how many, like, not just unborn children, but how many children overseas, like, they get murdered by U.S. military intervention right now,
yeah.
right? Because it's like, you can always throw that in, and then if they're a Republican, they're probably going to hand wave that away or just not address it at all.
always,
You know?
always.
So
Yeah.
I think that's a good retort to that. But as Kerry said, you know, I think just in general, an anarchist society would just handle this so much better, and there would be actual like market incentives and means and innovations to at least drastically reduce it. Right.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you would ever get rid of it completely, but I'm saying that I think it'd be drastically reduced in an anarchist society.
Yeah.
A lot of ones I've been noticing is they keep drawing the legal, like you say a killing or murder, or you say any term to describe the death of the fetus, and they'll respond with, well, that's actually a legal term and does not apply to abortion. And they're all just wrapped into this like legalistic morality. They can't distinguish from the two.
Oh, God,
Why do you think that is? I can't figure it out.
Well, most people are legal positivists, right? So they only, their moral sense is like whatever the law says at any given time, right? So, and it's just their like internal biases because the law agrees with them, so they're going to stand up for it. To a certain extent, though, like when a lot of them were telling me, well, you know, this is the law, but they would tell me morality is subjective, but this is the law. But it's like, okay, if morality is subjective, then how do you determine whether this is a good law or not? Right. What basis do you place to determine whether this is a good law or not? Because if you're saying morality is subjective, my opinion on the law is just as valuable as yours then. So who is right here? Right. So,
well, and how can you, if you're speaking to somebody on the left, how can you be upset with, corporations getting away with what they do, or saying that having no living wage is immoral? Like, how can you actually object to any aspect of the law if you're just going to say morality is subjective? Like, that doesn't even begin to make sense.
Right.
Basically, all of their attempts lead to absurdity, logical absurdity in some way or another.
I actually did get one honest person to tell me in the conjoined twin example that, yeah, it would be okay for one of them to murder the other. Like, they actually admitted that. So that person was at least honest.
Was this before or after the greatest line in Twitter history that you unloaded?
Which one was it?
The transmogrifying magic tunnel.
Oh, yeah. That was after. Yeah, that was
so
after.
What is a vagina? Just a transmogrifying magic tunnel? Like, that was the greatest thing I've ever read.
I must have missed that one.
Crickets.
So funny.
That was actually the tweet that spawned it. They found me from that tweet. I just remembered that's how it started. Yeah.
That's great. Well, it's got to be magical something, right? I mean,
right, for it to
and infuse you with rights.
Of rights on your way out, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Here's
what
your
happens
diploma.
to people who are cut out by cesarean?
Oh.
They have to be injected after the fact with their rights.
Right. There you go.
Yeah, I'm tired of it, honestly. I've been what is the pro-life stance? One thing I stayed when I was like a hardcore conservative. So I've been like doing abortion debates for, I know, only 2 years, but still, I'm tired of it. It's only been 2 years. I don't want to do it anymore.
Well, and one thing that they do, and both the pro-lifers and the pro-choicers do this, they try to make ethical arguments or metaphysical arguments for personhood, for example, And then they try to project that onto the legal rights question without any sort of theory of how rights are derived in the first place.
Right.
So they just confuse the whole thing, right? They're starting over here.
Intentional, though.
I don't think it's intentional. I think that they really believe, like the ethics aspect of it. I really think they believe if it's ethical, then there should be a law, right? And so that's why you have, pro-choice philosophers who are trying to argue that legal abortion is a matter of ethics. And, Marianne Warren was the one who came up with the personhood argument. She said, even if this is a human being, it's not a person. It doesn't have moral agency. Therefore, it can't have rights. So they get it confused by talking about all of this over here and then saying, and that's why it shouldn't be legal or it should be legal, without actually delving into a theory of rights.
Yeah, I saw that all through my timeline. Well, no, it's a human being, but it's not a person, right? It was like, okay, all right.
Yeah, America's been down that road for crying out loud, and we are revisiting that right now. Like, why do we want to do that?
Right.
I don't remember who I went through. Part of my problem is I lose things. Collections of research and I lose social media accounts when I get banned. But I lost my Facebook, and I had so many debates on there and so much research gathered into notes and things that I would use there first and before I came over to Twitter. And I remember doing a big one where I went and found a bunch of, because I had heard repeatedly that this idea that this is not a person, this is not a human, this is not a living being, needs to be abandoned. And this was from the pro-abortion, like pro-choice advocates. The big names going out and speaking were saying, guys, stop. Enough is enough. The science is settled. It's a person. It's a human, but it seems like it just hasn't caught on with everyone else. That's, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like 10
well,
years later, I don't know.
I think it hasn't.
Found that too?
Yeah, no, I think it hasn't caught on. First of all, it started on the pro-choice side, but then the pro-lifers picked it up because they wanted to pass these personhood laws, right? Saying having the government define personhood as beginning at conception. And I was opposed to that. I mean, I'm a pro-lifer, and I was like, you don't want the government defining what personhood is. Like, how ridiculous is that?
You'll exclude people from it? No.
Right. As soon as you, laws are amendable. Like, if you actually pass that law, you're successful in passing a law that says personhood begins at conception. When the pro-choice side gains power in 4 years, they're just going to go in there and rewrite it and say, no, personhood begins at such and such a time. So I'm not sure exactly why it hasn't caught on to either side, that's a terrible argument, and we shouldn't.
Right, like we waste so much time trying to dispel that.
Right.
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, when I've talked about it in libertarian terms, I explain that a fetus is a self-owner, but self-ownership is not personhood. That's not the same thing. We're talking about what makes you a rights-bearing individual.
Right.
That's a completely different question. When you talk about the philosophical, like the metaphysical debate of personhood, that's it's just an interesting question, because it's like, okay, what are all the things that constitute personhood? Let's talk about it. And then somebody, Marianne Warren comes along and is like, oh, that's interesting. I think I'll use it in order to defend my view of abortion.
Right.
So it's a non sequitur. Right.
Because it's like, that's a very good point, because it's like, philosophers are still debating like what personhood actually contains, like what are its essential qualities in the first place for born human beings. They're still debating this. So trying to apply this when it hasn't even been, assigned.
They can't even agree on what life is, guys.
Right.
I know.
Right.
I mean, it's this huge gamut. I'm fascinated with self. And how would you guys define self? For that what you are, the essence of you?
Oh man.
I'm not even gonna try. I'm not even gonna try. I got no clue, man.
I think this is probably the hardest problem in philosophy, to be quite honest. It's one of the top three for sure.
I borrowed mine from psychology.
Okay.
I have a friend that we were like sounding boards for each other, right? I can say, this is what I think, and he'll help me cut through the crap and hone it and make it precise. And we were trying to figure out what self was. I will use a singular subject of experience. That's a large portion of psychology separates it that way. That's how you separate self from other. Because, and to give an example, even when it's conjoined twins, even when it's a mother to developing individual, you can both witness this. You can be at the same event and you each experience it slightly differently, right?
Yes.
You are a singular subject of experience. And I thought that was really, that it was simple, but accurate. And
it doesn't get too in depth to where you could poke holes in it. You know what I mean?
So like this, we're all in this meeting together. We're all hearing the same things. We're all hearing the same words, the same people, the same arguments, but we're four distinct subjects of experience.
Yes. It was so enraging to me. Just hopping back to the debate for a second on Twitter when they were trying to say that the conjoined twins were one body. I thought that's, you know what I mean? It's like
that's what I call the shared body, like shared ownership. They're not the same thing as a single thing. They're not the same thing as a soul thing.
Because they kept trying to tell me, well, no, they're not actually infringing on each other's bodies because it's one body. It's like, no, they're two bodies stuck together. That's the point of the that's what conjoined is.
In varying degrees, even if it's just a little bit of skin or it's sharing major organs or it's whatever, they're still two distinct subjects of experience.
Yes.
They're just stuck together.
Right.
So, yeah.
Anybody else want to try to define self? Or
I think that was great. I agree with that.
I'll just say
that as well.
Yeah, I'll just say part of my research is on this concept of identity and self. And I think, I mean, the simplest thing that I can say at this point is that it's non-reductive. You can't reduce it to quantity. You can't reduce it to, I mean, even experience. And that's interesting because experience isn't just one thing, right? But you can't reduce it to mind. You can't reduce it to body. You can't reduce it to faith. You can't reduce it to any of these aspects. It's all encapsulated in one. And so, you know, it's not reductive. We can't say, oh, if you don't have sentience, for example, then you aren't, you know, or you don't have consciousness, then you're not. No, that's not the way it works because you can't reduce it. So I'll say that much, and yeah, I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
But that's why, because it's non-reductive, I think that's really what bothered me about the only experience I have like reading or listening to Kinsella is where he went, you know, what even is self-ownership, right? Okay. What even is self? I mean, I think, you know, who knows what that is? Let's call it body ownership. No, stop. You've ruined it. Like,
well, and body ownership,
you are not your meat sack.
That's just one aspect of it, right? In fact, that's not even an aspect. That's an element of an aspect.
Right.
You know? I think that whole realm is really interesting, and you know,
same. So that's why I'll never be a propertarian.
Right.
Not all rights are property rights. I'm sorry. A lot of them are, but not all.
I've just started saying, because I've also had like grievances with that. I've just said that all rights are self-ownership rights because that's where they all derive from, right?
Exactly.
I think that's fair.
Self-ownership.
Right, because really property rights are just rights of exclusion, and the rights of exclusion come from, they originate from yourself, right? That's,
that's fair.
Okay, I only have 2 more questions, and then I'm about to wrap it up. The consent to sex is not consent to pregnancy.
Okay, I want to address this one because I actually agree with that. And the reason why I agree with that is because we are actually able to take actions to mitigate. So if if a condom is used or if birth control pill is used, what we're saying is we aren't consenting to pregnancy. We're consenting to sex, but not to pregnancy. Now, that attempt to mitigate conception can certainly fail. But I do think that it's possible for somebody to consent to sex and not consent to the idea that they're getting pregnant. Now, the process of conception itself is completely involuntary. You have no control over it.
Consent has nothing to do with it. That's
So,
where I'm hung up.
yeah, like you don't have control over whether conception takes place. You don't even have control over whether the fertilized egg, the zygote actually implants, unless you're taking some sort of, contraceptive pill that is.
But then it's only things you can do to improve the chances, or, you
Right.
still have, you're not,
Right.
even a doctor doing it.
Yeah.
period, is still just an attempt to control something that is largely beyond our control.
Right. And the example that I use to actually illustrate this is with a woman who wants to be pregnant, but is infertile. If her giving consent to sex meant also giving consent to pregnancy, then she should be able to have control over whether she gets pregnant, and she doesn't. That's a completely involuntary process.
Mm-hmm.
So the consent aspect is the sex, right? And that's where women need to be making choices, making risk assessments and considering trade-offs and all of those other things
And deploying
that we
mitigations
do.
and
You can, if you want to try to mitigate, yes, that's fine. You need to be aware of the risks and that you are not free from the consequences should your attempts fail. And you need to take that into consideration when you take that action. But I don't think that it's right to say that a woman who consents to pregnancy is consenting to conception. That just doesn't jive.
I would agree with that, the way you just worded it there.
Yeah.
But not consent to sex is not consent to pregnancy, but consent to sex is acceptance of the risk.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Of the natural consequences, that result from any action that you take.
Right.
Whether it's getting in a car is consenting to the risk of, or not consenting, is acceptance of the risk of getting into a car accident.
Yes.
You don't get to go, if you go, well, I didn't consent to this car accident.
Right.
Your bones aren't going to magically knit back together.
Right.
Right.
The car example is really, really good because I was thinking of this the other day. I was responding to just this argument. It's like if you're going down a car and you're speeding, right, and you see a kid in the street and you slam on your brakes, there's still a moment of it's determined like you're not going to be able to stop in time, even if you slammed on your brakes. So if you hit that kid, you're still responsible, even if you didn't,
even if you tried to avoid him.
That's right. Even if you tried to avoid it, and you stopped, you did everything you could at that time to stop, but you still hit the kid. You are still, responsible for the action ultimately, even if it was not in your complete control. So I think that's,
I forgot what my second question was going to be.
No.
I had like 2 pages of notes with questions wrote out, and I cannot find my notebook anywhere.
Oh, bummer.
All right.
So I quickly tried to write up.
a bunch.
Yeah. Any of you guys not start pro-choice? I mean, pro-life? Any of you guys start off pro-choice to kind of like develop your views and change your views, or do you all kind of stay pro-life and just consistently?
I'd say, I started out pro-life because my parents were pro-life. I would say that there came a point where I started listening to some of the really terrible stories that women had experienced that led them to abort. So these aren't these aren't the women out there who are like, I'm going to, name my next abortion after you or whatever. These are the women who were actually going through hell, right? And once I started hearing those stories and genuinely listening, for crying out loud, you can genuinely listen to the plight of these women because it's real. And I think that the more that we can give empathy in those situations that are really tough or traumatic or, whatever, the better. The better we are at bridging that divide, right? And seeing their own humanity. But yeah, for about 10 years, I stopped talking about abortion entirely because after listening to those stories, it was like, I don't know how to solve this problem. it wasn't until the abortion abolition movement came out and said, we're going to start passing legislation calling women who abort, first degree murders and sticking the death penalty to them. And I was like, whoa, wait a second. Hold up. All right. I'm coming back.
Right.
I never really, I knew I was pro-life, but I never really knew any of the arguments. And then Steven Crowder did that I'm pro-life, changed my mind video. And that's where I kind of got most of the arguments from. Like, okay, this actually has some merit behind it besides, well, God made it, so it has to be valued. There's some more.
Right, yeah.
There's more merit
we
there.
default to that when we're raised in the church, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which I think is a mistake. There's so many positions that church teachers and Christians hold that I think are good, but they derived it from stupid reasoning. And they don't argue for them at all correctly. And it's so painful to watch.
Well, and if they were persuasive, I mean, half of the women who abort are self-professing Christians. So if, I wouldn't say it's easy to say, well, maybe they're just not real Christians. No, there's something else going on and we should address it instead of trying to say, nope, this is a theological argument, or this is a matter of faith and you just don't have enough of it.
If I'm debating somebody and they say they've had an abortion, I kind of just stop debating. I don't want to change their mind, honestly, because then they have to accept the fact that they've done something. And I don't want to be that guy to give that to them, So if they say they've had an abortion, I kind of just stop and step back. I don't want to. Yeah. If I do convince them, then they have to live with the fact they had an abortion. Right. I don't want to be that guy. So
I don't talk about abortion that much just for that reason, actually. But I felt like I got pulled into it because I was so frustrated that they kept telling me my analogy was not exactly the same. And I was just like, okay, well, wait a minute. Walk me through why it's wrong. And I'll accept
how dare you have an analogy that's an analogy?
Right. Yeah, I know exactly. Yeah. And it was like, so I usually don't talk about this. And I'm the same way, right? If someone really struggled and they had an abortion, I have nothing but empathy for those people. You know what I mean? It's like, that's, when you have all these people coming at you and they're telling you, well, they're just giving you terrible arguments. I'm like, okay, they're obviously coming from a place of emotion here, right? And not really rationality whatsoever.
If you could give, I'll say the question for later. Libertarians are kind of split on abortion.
Yeah.
They're very split on. Maybe because I've never been pro-choice. I don't really see good arguments from the libertarians who are pro-choice. I don't see anything really convincing there.
So
besides the victimism, that's the only
right. Yeah, I was going to say evictionism. So this ultimately comes down to in my opinion, it comes down to the belief whether you believe the fetus has rights or not. Right. So ultimately, that's the crux of the issue for libertarians. If you're a libertarian who believes that the fetus does not have right until a certain amount of time after, gestation, then you're going to, from a libertarian perspective, you're logically going to support the right to abort up until that point. They don't view it as a human with rights. Right. I think if you do view now, see, there are some libertarians, and this is actually what caused me to talk about this, because it was originally a libertarian I was talking about with abortion. If you're a libertarian and you do believe the fetus has rights, I think the only logical conclusion you can come to is that it is an aggression because your eviction is disproportionate to the act.
So I tend to think that pro-choice and pro-life libertarians have way more common ground than they want to admit. And I think part of it is because, Walter Block's argument aside, because not all libertarians are evictionists either. You have a lot of the blue-pilled people who are just parroting the conventional pro-choice arguments. But both pro-life and pro-choice libertarians believe that there should be no taxpayer-funded abortions. They both believe that the market should respond to it. And so there's no reason why, pro-choicers who are motivated to provide products and services that are intended to better prevent unwanted pregnancies. That's an economic aspect that we can all agree on. I think we can all agree that the market can also provide products and services that provide life-affirming options when unplanned pregnancies or unwanted pregnancies occur. And so, given all of that, and we also believe in bodily autonomy and agency of the woman and self-ownership. And so when we look at all of the areas where we have common ground, suddenly abortion becomes a pretty small issue. So that's not to say that it's an issue that can be dismissed, but I think that we do ourselves a disservice by saying that we're so divided on it. We actually have quite a bit of common ground. And if we actually also start talking about the problems with, enforcement, how we should all be anti-authoritarian when it comes to enforcing, criminal law, there would be more common ground there as well. So then the question really is, does a fetus have rights and does a woman have to recognize them? But we have a ton of common ground elsewhere. And, when it comes to promoting libertarian candidates, I think a pro-lifer could very easily say, look, we understand that, the plank of the Libertarian Party says this, but let me tell you where we have all this common ground and why these are good things, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice. And there's still room to have this dialogue about the philosophical nature of, the self-ownership or rights of the fetus.
What would be, if you could give one lesson or one critique of improvement for the traditional pro-lifers, what would you guys recommend to them? Like, what would a critique you would give them? Be like, hey, this is one thing you do what you could improve on. Do not be so abrasive and terrible about it. Like, what would be some of you advice you would give them?
Stop clinging to the Republican Party and the idea that we're just going to overturn Roe v. Wade the next time around.
Yeah.
Like, get over it already. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, start focusing on emergency pregnancy clinics and things like that, and think about saving more children than critiquing, going after women necessarily who are, who might be in a bad spot and who might have had an abortion. Just focus on trying to mitigate this problem as best as possible, I would say.
Yeah, put your money where your mouth is.
Right. Yeah. Stop doing that.
It's cliche, but it's necessary. I mean, we have an epidemic of kids in foster care.
Yeah.
The Christian community can literally solve that in a month. There's so many Christian households, put up or shut up, take in a kid or two. Yeah. Come on.
Stop donating to the government to make them solve your problems. When you could solve them.
Right. It's my philosophy for everything. Develop, implement, promote, and use alternatives to state violence for the problems people look to state violence to solve. We can eliminate the foster care system and most of DCF's function just by taking in foster kids.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. What's some how to put this? As pro-life people, we can call a lot of names: anti-choicers, forced birthers. What are some of the? Besides those, have you guys heard any other kind of funny names for the pro-life position?
Right now, I'm trending for advocating sexual slavery.
Oh,
what they call it? Yes, sexual slavery.
Oh man,
I can't. Is that like sexual
forced
anarchy?
Birth? Really, guys? No, that's not how that works.
Yeah, I haven't heard any other ones besides those, but
I've never heard the sexual slavery one. Sexual
that's new to me. That's the last 48 hours.
That's probably thanks to the Handmaid's Tale stuff.
Yeah.
I've never. I probably wanted to watch that just so I can know what the hell everyone's going on about. But every time I even think about it, I cringe just thinking about it. I don't want to do it.
I tell people people are like, oh, this is a pro-life dystopia. I said, no, it's about authoritarian government trying to control your body. That's what it's about. Yeah. It's not about being pro-life. But
I bet you this Halloween we're going to see someone wear a sexy Handmaid's Tale costume with completely unironically. Completely unironically, they're going to wear a sexy Handmaid's Tale costume. I can see it now, and I'm already upset about it. I'm already upset. I want to see a person just spaz out on it.
It's weird that they so desperately want to apply this dystopian concept, you know, in The Handmaid's Tale to what we're living now. It's like, are you like I don't know who came up with it, but it's almost like they created their own boogeyman, you know, for their own uses. It's kind of the impression that I'm getting from the way that they're using it. Even my own sister, I'm like, what?
Well,
were we raised in the same house? Like, what is wrong with you?
you guys know that Roe v. Wade paves the way for A Handmaid's Tale.
Oh yeah.
Because what Roe v. Wade says is that a woman's liberty interest is subject to state interest.
Right.
That's what it's subject to. And so a woman can abort so long as it's within the state's interest.
Right.
And if it's not right now, it just happens to be that legal abortion happens to be within state interest.
Yep.
But if it ever turns out that making more babies is in the state interest, Roe v. Wade gives
declining birth rate.
Yeah. Roe v. Wade gives them grounds to do that.
Right. Yeah. And all legal arguments end there, right? All legal arguments end in, okay, they're going to allow us to do this while they allow us to do this, right? So it's it's a circle.
Yeah. What Roe v. Wade did was it allowed the government to regulate abortion, and it also allowed the government to regulate pregnancy, even for women who want their babies, right? Pregnancy is regulated. So it's not about bodily autonomy and agency. The Roe v. Wade is as terrible for women as it is for fetuses.
Oh yeah.
Last thing, I say everyone plug your stuff after this. There's no we always talk about the lack of empathy they have towards the fetuses, but I don't get, like, if I was talking to somebody and they generally saw, like, when I walk outside and I swat let's say an example here. If water was poisonous, or that's not a good example. What I'm trying to say is, like, if we believe it's a life and that life is being murdered, they don't care at all that we have, like if someone came to me and is, like, kind of like, hey, I think you're murdering someone or something, I would be at least open to their idea, because it's like, okay, maybe I am. They want to mock us for caring about it, you know, like they can make abortion to you, you know. It's like the person here is generally upset and caring about what even if you think they're wrong, they perceive something to be loss of life here, and they just don't care. There's no empathy towards the other person at all. I don't get that, like, apathetic. They're so apathetic about it. I don't get it. You guys have any comment on that?
Well, I sort of blame that on the pro-life side, because the conventional pro-life side still infantilizes women. You're at best an incubator, or a victim that needs a man's protection. So get married instead of, having an abortion. The pro-life side does not have, the conventional pro-life side, I don't think, has a very high view of women at all. And so from a pro-choice perspective, what you're hearing somebody say is, you're not capable of making this decision for yourself. You need to have somebody to take care of you.
Yep.
And that's been the paradigm. I mean, I'm not a feminist, but that has been the paradigm for a lot of human history, is women are weak and need to be protected by a husband, or women are weak and need to be protected by the state. There isn't really this category for women are strong and capable and can make decisions for themselves and are also responsible for those decisions.
For their actions, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think the best thing that libertarian and anarchist pro-lifers can do is emphasize the self-ownership, the bodily autonomy and agency of the woman, that she is empowered to make decisions for herself, but that means she is also responsible for her decisions.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think this, like, it's very important to, like, point, because going back to what you're saying, like, you know, I think what you hear a lot, and this actually dovetails nice into what we were saying before about, like, how some of them will seem to be very callous, right? Like they'll call it a clump of cells, right? It's like, well,
medical waste, yeah,
right,
Mhm.
yeah. So I agree with Kerry though, like how this is kind of the fault of like the arguments the pro-life people have made in the past. They feel like if I'm being very generous to them, I would imagine they feel like kind of cornered in some way when they hear these arguments, even if like, so if they hear like a libertarian or an anarchist making a pro-life argument, they're going to assume you're just a Republican, right? That's what they're going to assume in their head.
Yep.
So it makes sense why they'd be so defensive about it. But I do think it's really important to always say, no, we're not saying you don't have a right to your body. We're just saying that this other being is a rights-bearing creature and they have rights that must be respected as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of that right now in this current discussion. This, you're advocating for force and da da da. Show me where I have, because I actually haven't. We're just talking about what's just and what's not, what's true, what's a truth claim and what's not. You know, yeah, it's very emotionally charged.
Yeah,
very.
Actually, it reminds me. I wanted to bring up the whole right to privacy thing. That's why I keep hearing a lot. Is like you don't have it's a private medical affair, and you don't have a right to comment on that. Like that one to me is probably the most frustrating because, like in any other circumstance, where it's another individual, it's two individuals, or one individual. Obviously, the prostitute I murder is private affairs. It's, completely private.
Which is so strange because many of them favor these vaccine mandates.
Yeah, lady literally was saying pro-choice and vaccine mandate in a bio. Like also handle, wasn't it?
Oh God!
Handle was like pro-choice vaccine mandates.
And she even asked me on Twitter, "Are you vaccinated?" Just randomly out of the blue, and I just told her, "No, my body, my choice." And then I just she blocked me after that. So.
And the conversation died.
Yeah. So
yeah. Well, it's interesting that their view of my body, my choice means they get to make decisions about other people's bodies.
Right.
Yeah. That's where the consistency is.
Right. Whenever they say it's a private medical decision, it's like, okay, there are two parties in this medical decision at least, right? You and the child, but the child can't consent to it or like anything. So is it really private if you're encroaching on their bounds? It's like, well, no, it's
not at all. It's the same thing. Like if you're caring for your ailing grandparents in the spare bedroom and you're tired of taking care of them, it's not a private medical decision to euthanize them unilaterally.
Right. Or marital rape that happens in the bedroom.
Right.
It's like, and I'm certain that they're opposed to that, but we're not allowed to actually talk about crimes that might happen in the bedroom.
Right. Secret crimes are still crimes, guys.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. It's honestly, I'm sure there are some people out there who make good pro-choice arguments. I just haven't run across any of them.
Yeah.
Like I
applaud them. Right? Like I go berserk trying to encourage them. Like somebody started one last night. I'm like, okay, yes, good, awesome. Let's talk about this. I try to be like, it's like teaching toddlers, when they put the block in right, you go extra exuberant over the top, encouraging them.
Right.
To try to positively reinforce that behavior.
Well, and I think the good pro-choice arguments, and to some degree, I'd say Beverly Wilding Harrison's argument is good in one sense, in that she's arguing for bodily autonomy and agency. And even Judith Jarvis Thompson's violinist is a good argument as far as it goes, which is against medical coercion. But in both of those cases, and in Marianne Warren's case, they just overstate their claims, right? They're overstating the authority that a woman has over the fetus, and so that's where they run into issues. They start out with good arguments as far as they go, but then they overstate the claim.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think all of them boil down to that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, it's been about an hour and a half. Anybody have anything you want to add before we do the plugs? Or
analogies are not equivalencies.
Yes. God.
I'm gonna have a T-shirt made.
Right. Yes.
The Venn diagram does not have to overlap 1-to-1 to be legitimate in any way. Yeah,
I actually do want to get you guys' take because it was something that was just created. It was an argument that was come up with in a vacuum, sort of, in a way. It was my own way of thinking it through and reasoning through it. I was having a discussion with some people way back in the day on Google Plus just before it closed down. I missed the plus. But I was trying to reason through whether, who has a claim to what in this situation where there's a mother and the developing individual. And I sort of stumbled onto this, like, wait, hold on. How does this work then? It's inside her body, giving it at least worth fleshing out shared ownership claim, right? To her body, because it's in hers. But she's not inside its body at all, giving her zero claim to its body. So it's like this biological catch-22, biologically, philosophically, I don't know. But is that completely crazy?
No, I don't think so. I think to a certain extent, right? So even if what in the argument when I was on Twitter, I was just conceding like they have the right to evict, But I think that leaves out also something in particular, which is that if you're through libertarian like ethics, if you create someone in a vulnerable position, you're responsible to get them out of that vulnerable position, right? So if, for example, if I was going back to the plane analogy, if I was a pilot,
you just can't help it.
Yeah, if I was a pilot and I had a group of passengers in my plane, I couldn't just decide, okay, well, I'm good. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to stop caring and I'm just going to, parachute out of the plane and let the plane, crash or something. That would obviously still be murder, right? Because I'm still responsible for the passengers, even if, I can't just abandon my duties. So I do think that if you're a parent, you do have a responsibility for your children unless you transfer your guardianship rights to, someone else or something like that.
Yeah. But even then it's not ownership. Right. They're still my kids are still self-owners. It's
right. Yeah.
You have a stewardship rights over that.
Stewardship. Yes. Yeah. You do not own your children.
Stewardship never involves the right to destroy or harm.
That's right. You do not
Kinsella does talk about when in terms of crime, like if somebody steals your TV or whatever, then you actually have a proprietary interest in the person who stole your TV, not just to get the TV back, but some sort of recompense or restitution. And so the fact that your offspring is brought into the world against their will through your action creates a proprietary interest between parent and offspring. So parents don't own their children per se, but there is a proprietary interest between the two of them. And one thing that I argued in the debate with Walter Block was that the reason why states can't create positive obligations or positive rights is because they lack the proprietary interest that exists between parents and the children.
Right.
And I would say that proprietary interest fades over time as the child becomes his own human actor.
And more capable of managing that self-ownership that they exist with.
Yeah. So there's definitely a proprietary interest there such that the parents are obligated to the fetus in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wondered about, is the ownership claim of the fetus on the shared ownership claim of the fetus on the mother stronger than, her going, well, then I own the fetus. That's come up. Like, no, you don't. You're not inside their body at all.
Well, and there are biological advantages in normal situations. There are biological advantages to the woman to be when she's pregnant.
Yeah.
I can't
benefit on her.
Yeah, there is conferring some benefit.
Like my amazing skin and hair and nails.
Yes. Amazing skin, hair. Yeah. That actually there's some and I can't remember it off the top of my head, but there's some anti-cancer properties that come along, anti-breast cancer properties that come along because of breastfeeding and all of that.
Chance.
Yeah.
And then with breastfeeding and with all of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say that you definitely have, I think that there is an argument for common property between the two of them, and both of them benefit from that. But yeah, that's one that needs to be like worked out.
Yeah.
Yeah. My formulation on was kind of like, because what I was doing is like, even if I accept that they can evict, when you're evicting someone, like if someone just drops a piece of property, or they discard a piece of property onto your property, right, and they just abandon it, you can do whatever you want with it. You can break it, you can throw it away, you can do whatever. But when you're dealing with a rights-bearing creature on your property, you can't dispose of it any way. You can't evict it or exclude it from your property in any way you wish at any time. And that was really the crux of my argument, right? So like if someone drops a baby off on your doorstep, I use the analogy, you can't just like field goal kick it off your property. Right. So your eviction must respect to a proportional level the rights of the other person in the eviction.
It requires communication and consent.
Yes.
And it's
and
not
the baby
just,
and the fetus can't leave, mind you,
right?
Right? So they're kind of trapped there. So
that capability and communication, like, okay, you can rescind your consent to sex at any time, even when he's inside you. But that doesn't mean from the moment you decide in your head, you can now kill him.
Right, exactly. If that was true,
you have to communicate that to him and give him the chance to withdraw before you can claim defense. If
you could immediately just withdraw it at any time, or I mean, you can withdraw it, but it's on the other person. You have to give them a reasonable amount of time. If it was not like that, you could invite someone to your house, say, nope, you're trespassing now, and I get to shoot you. Right?
Yeah.
That would just be like,
Let's respond to this real quick. The abortion argument isn't a good look for promoting anarchy. Please stop.
Oh my goodness.
Well, I mean, I
stop advocating against murder, guys.
I promote anarchism in a lot of different ways. So it's like I'm talking about abortion right now, so I don't really know what to say besides for you don't need to constantly be talking about anarchism in every point in time or promoting it in every, people are going to promote it in different ways, and it's not always going to align with what you want out of anarchist arguments, and that's fine. But, we don't have to, argue over the same anarchist things every single day. Sometimes it's fun to get into the really hot topics.
I don't know. I promote anarchy as the solution to abortion.
Right. Yeah. So, right. Exactly.
Like, yeah.
Well, you touched on it a little while ago, Kerry, when you said, talking about how the traditional or the whatever it was, pro-lifers. Mm-hmm. There's having this I don't know what to call it, like a litmus test of, you got to declare Jesus and then you can get in kind of thing. We can promote what we want to see, right? We want to see, spontaneous order and, the abolition of the state, whatever. We can do that in a way that isn't browbeating anarchism into people's heads. Right. I've been arguing for 3 days about abortion, and I haven't said that I'm an anarchist a single time.
Right.
It's the principle of it. It stands alone. You don't have to slap an anarchist label on it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It all comes from the same place, right? Your anarchism informs all of these other things, and you don't need to be advocating anarchism as a whole to necessarily focus on, the minutia and I don't want to say it's a little problem, but it's, it's one of the many problems or that we might see. So.
It's not how we're converting people to anarchism.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's just.
No, I'm at Ace this because you guys don't get the same objection. How do you respond to the whole "you're a man, you can't have an opinion on this"?
Oh well, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but I can have an opinion on medical malpractice. You know what I mean?
No, you can't. No, you can't.
Right. Well, there you go. That's a good point. Right.
You're not an expert.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, people can have opinions on whatever they want to, and you can't stop them. So,
Well, I would say if you're going to peg men as being 100% at fault for pregnancy, then you're gonna have to let them have an opinion on abortion.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
I think we've covered most of the common objections from both sides, kind of critiqued everyone.
Mm-hmm.
What's what libertarians do best? We just look at everybody and say, you're all stupid. Here's the answer. That's why I became a libertarian. I love looking at everybody and be like, no, you're wrong. Let me explain. I don't have any more questions. Anybody want to add anything? Anyone talk about anything specific about this topic? I mean, I'm happy to keep going. I normally stream for about an hour 45, 2 hours. So if y'all want to keep it going, turn it off. It's all up to y'all.
I think I'm all talked out. If I can plug my book, the book that I co-authored with the guys from LCI, Faith Seeking Freedom, you can get that on Amazon. And I wrote the chapter on abortion and contributed to other parts as well. But that's a really good book. I think it's like $10 on Amazon.
And if you guys are read it and enjoy it, one of my early episodes on the podcast is a book club episode with Kerry and
Doug Stewart.
Stewart about it. So if you very early episode, my sound quality of mic with terrible, voice, no video. It's my third episode, so bear with me, but it's a good episode.
Yeah.
I don't think I have much. You can follow me at ace_archist on Twitter, and you can see me debating people incessantly when I should be sleeping.
How much sleep do you actually get?
So someone asked me this on Twitter. I only need like 4 to 5 hours of sleep a day, usually a night. Yeah. I really should get more, but I don't.
Great. Yeah. I'm like that.
Ellie, where can people find you at?
I mostly just on Twitter. I finally actually was given back access to Facebook. And so I try to be a little bit of everywhere just for the broader audience, but I am almost entirely on Twitter these days.
Yeah, same here. Well, guys, been another episode of the Catholic Libertarian podcast. Hope you've all enjoyed the stream. Hit the notification bell, like, subscribe, and share the show. I hit the wrong. Every time I go to end the stream, I hit the thumbnail for the background and not the actual. I always